So it's my pleasure to welcome you all to EuroSea's third anniversary today. So EuroSea, I'm just going to very quickly tell you the basics of EuroSea. And most of you probably knows that already, but EuroSea is all about improving, integrating the ocean observing and forecasting system for sustainable use of the oceans in a European context. It's a big project. We have more than 50 partners, budget of something around 13 million euros. We are now into the third year, running into the fourth year. We have 1 year more to go. So this is probably our last webinar, anniversary webinar. And just very quickly, the goals of EuroSea, you can all see them here. These are the three overarching goals of EuroSea. So we really want to improve a sustained ocean observing system in Europe, but integrating that in a global context because it's only one ocean. And in the end, we want to deliver ocean observations and forecasts, or you can call it ocean data, which lead to knowledge about the ocean, and climate is one important part of the ocean. Marine ecosystems and how they are vulnerable to human impacts, and many other issues actually that the ocean is important for, and we're going to hear some of that today. But we also want to demonstrate the importance of the ocean for society as a whole, and I think this is one part of that is having this webinar here. So I won't talk much now, and I will leave it to our moderator, Steve Hall. So Steve has over 30 years of experience in ocean science, policy and technology, which includes serving as an CEO of Society for Underwater Technology, was heading the international office at United Kingdom's National Oceanographic Center in Southampton, and being elected vice chair of UNESCO's Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. He's also fellow of the Institute of Marine Engineering, Science and Technology, and a fellow of the Society for Underwater Technology, and a member of the Marine Technological Society. So you hear there's a lot of technology and underwater and marine in that CV here. And he's currently a freelance ocean science, technology, and policy consultant, on mainly working for Nippon Foundation on the Seabed 2030 project. So we're very happy to have Steve here to be our moderator, and I will then leave to Steve to moderate the session. Over to you, Steve.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Toste. Good to meet you all. I'm glad everybody's online, and we've got an excellent lineup of speakers today. I'll try not to waste any time now. So we're online for the next 2 hours. As you'll have seen, it's being recorded. If you possibly can and you have the bandwidth, try and leave your cameras on, because it helps the speakers understand they're speaking to human beings. But please leave your microphones off unless we get to the question session later on. So our first speaker this morning with the keynote is Ronan McAdam. He's going to speak on ocean observing and forecasting for sustainable development. He's a researcher working at the CMCC, the Euro-Mediterranean Centre on Climate Change in Bologna, Italy. And after gaining his PhD in physical oceanography in 2019 at Imperial College London, he's been working full-time on seasonal forecasting activities for the EuroSea project since its beginning. So over to you, Ronan.
Well, thank you very much, Steve, and thank you very much to the organisers of this event for this opportunity to set the scene today for what will be 2 rich hours of discussion, I hope. So indeed, as we've heard, my talk title is Ocean Observing and Forecasting for Sustainable Development, which is the main goal of EuroSea. And I'd like to point out that perhaps the most important word here is not observations, it's not forecasting. I'd say it's not even sustainable development, I'd say it's for, because we're doing these activities, these oceanographic activities, which are done and have been done for decades, but we're now doing them for sustainable development. So I'm going to set the scene, and I'm going to introduce a few, we hope, encouraging and exciting results from our forecasting activities. I will begin then with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And as oceanographers, we typically look to goals number 13 and 14 as those in which we can have a direct impact. But I would argue that given the ocean is a provider of jobs, a provider of food, a birthplace for devastating weather systems, I would argue that each of these goals is impacted by the ocean and can impact, in turn, oceanographic activities. So I think we should keep that ambitious view in mind for today. In EuroSea in particular, we're motivated by the ocean's role in the global economy, the global climate system. In particular, the aquaculture and fishery industries provide livelihoods for many, many people in all continents. And there's evidence now growing to suggest that ocean-based or blue foods have good reason to overtake land-based foods as perhaps a main source of nutrition. Studies on the right, we see on the right here, for example, comparing greenhouse gas emissions and the relative nutritional score for farmed and wild fish, and we see that they are typically performing better than their land-based counterparts. On the other hand, there's a famous quote by the I think, head of NOAA in the USA. If you like your weather forecast, thank an oceanographer. And I think the picture here of the hurricane, which of course has its genesis in the open ocean, makes that point very clear. So we are not lacking in motivation, and I know we'll hear even more points today. But I would like now to see where we are in the grand scheme of things when it comes to ocean observing and forecasting. So I'd like to get us all in a time machine and take us back 200 years or so, and give a very brief and a very incomplete history of progress in ocean observations and forecasting. Excuse me if there's so much missing, but I wasn't around for most of it. I'll try my best. So we have perhaps this first era of, I would say, marked by individual genius and individual Herculean efforts, such as the first global oceanographic expedition in the 1870s, the slow development of the equations for fluid motion and turning them into usable tools for predicting the atmospheric state. And if you do have time, look up the story of Richardson and his first by-hand attempt at a weather forecast. And as they say, necessity is the mother of invention. And during World War II, there was a need for wind wave forecasting during the landing of troops. And a decade later, we finally entered the era of operational numerical weather forecasting, performed with computers, not by hand, as Richardson attempted. I move now on to a second era, if I can define such a long time so simply. I think this era is defined by not just the obvious increase in technological capabilities, but also an enormous increase in collaborative efforts. I think we see here, for example, in 1953 and 1977, two, I think, year-long attempts at increasing the spread of observations of the atmosphere and the ocean globally. And at the same time, in 77, quite a symbolic thing here is that the first international weather forecasting center was born. That's the ECMWF. Since then, we've had developments in key tools for forecasting, like ensemble forecasting and coupling, which are now absolutely standard and necessary for any forecasting activity. So the question is, well, where are we now in history? Well, EuroSea, I think, is positioning itself as taking the decades of ocean observations and development in forecasting and turning those into sectorial applications. For atmospheric and land-based variables, I would argue that there is already great progress there. So in that sense, looking for sectorial applications in the ocean, we are perhaps lagging behind. But we're not without potential here. So I, at the bottom, show you three key ocean and climate variables: the sea surface height, the sea surface temperature, and the ocean heat content, which is the integrated temperature over a depth range. And each of these has various potential sectorial applications, such as understanding sea level rise for port cities and small island nations. And the occurrence of marine heat waves affects both the economy in terms of damaging aquaculture and fishing activities, and also conservation efforts as well. So as I say, we're not without motivation to do what we do. Now I'm going to dive into a bit more detail on the activities I've been part of in EuroSea, and that is on seasonal forecasting. So just as it's important to know the weather, the temperature of the coming 3 or 4 days, it's also important to say if the coming seasons are going to be anomalously warm or dry, etc. And seasonal forecasting for atmospheric and land-based variables is a relatively mature science compared to that of ocean variables. So one of EuroSea's tasks was to validate the skill of ocean variables, the subsurface ocean, on seasonal timescales. And to do that, we used freely available seasonal forecast systems. The one you see on the right, this is a schematic of the CMCC's forecast system. It is coupled, so it links all these components of the Earth climate system. And the key point here is that to set up any forecast, seasonal or otherwise, you need initial conditions. And where do you get them from? Observations. So without observations, we have no forecasting. In the case of the CMCC system, we have hydrographic profiles, we have remote sensing of sea surface temperature and sea level anomaly. And those initial conditions, they are not perfect, they carry some error within them. With that error, we can quantify the uncertainty of our forecasts, and that's why we have not one, but usually an ensemble of forecast members. So observations are key there, and they're also key in the next stage of seasonal forecasting activities, that is the validation, to understand whether the forecasts you have calculated are accurate or reliable. And to do that, you need to compare to observations which are, as much as possible, independent from those with which you initialized your system. In EuroSea, we've used what we believe is the state of the art of global scale and long-term ocean observation data sets. So we have the European Space Agency, SST, we have Copernicus Climate Change Service, Sea Level, and we have Copernicus Marine Service reanalyses. And so we're looking here at a period of 93 to 2016, because that's what data we have available for seasonal forecast output. The longer the better, in order to create a statistically significant and reliable validation. So obviously 30, if you know the skill of 30 years, it's much more useful than knowing of 10 years. You can be more sure of your product. So far, the conclusion is that we need variety and longevity and continuity of observations just to be able to run a seasonal forecast system. So that's a little tour of the system we use at CMCC. What do we do with them? Well, the first thing we did was, as I said earlier, a first global scale skill assessment of the subsurface of the ocean. And we did that with the upper 300 meters heat content, which is a very important, not just ocean indicator, but indicator for the climate as well. And what we have on the right are the anomaly correlation scores between the forecast anomalies of 2 different seasons and the anomalies calculated by a global reanalysis, reconstruction of the ocean. And what we find is when the correlation score is high and significant, we have naturally an encouraging and good result. And we see for ocean heat content on seasonal timescales, good skill late into the forecast period, which is shown on the right. So we have May predictions of May, June, July, and May predictions of August, September, October. And we see good skill even in the latter season there. Encouraging. What we then did next is compare the subsurface skill to the surface skill. And what we see on the right is for the same time periods, a difference in the correlation score. So where you see red is where the upper 300 meters was predicted more accurately than the surface. Interesting news for the northeastern Atlantic and our local seas in Europe, where the subsurface seems to be much more predictable in the summer. But by and large in the ocean, we found that there are there's insignificant difference, implying that SST is well predicted as ocean heat content. Behind that, there is the caveat of, well, depending on where you are, the subsurface initialization is perhaps in inadequate quality compared to the surface ocean initialization, where there is indeed a more abundant amount of data sets to initialize with. So we have answered some questions and raised some new ones. Now, that's all interesting for us oceanographers, but how do you make that relevant for stakeholders? Okay, we, the oceanographers, need to understand the physical capabilities of our system, but we need to perhaps ship that in a different manner to stakeholders. And in EuroSea, there is, I think, great stakeholder-focused work, such as an example here on the left of the new buoy in the Danish farm. That's an aquaculture farm off the southwestern coast of Ireland. Real-time live monitoring of physical and potentially biogeochemical conditions. And you can't put a buoy everywhere, so what you do at the same time is you make use of these four-dimensional multi-decadal reanalyses, these reconstructions of the ocean. And in EuroSea, we've used global ones and we've used higher resolution regional ones. And here you see a schematic showing how you can look at the temperature at different depth levels for several decades. With such a tool, we have been tracking one of the extreme events of interest in EuroSea, and that is marine heat waves. With my colleagues in LMD in Paris and SOCIB in Spain, we've been looking at a national scale approach. So looking at the marine heat wave characteristics in different national waters. And while typically marine heat waves are studied with surface temperature, it's absolutely imperative that we start studying the subsurface conditions during marine heat waves, because a lot of the economic and ecological damage which occurs below the upper centimeter or meter, of course. And so on the right, we show a reconstruction of the average conditions of marine heat waves. And what we find, for example, is that the average duration is longer at depth, so your extreme conditions tend to last longer. And we find a signal of interesting oceanographic features, such as in the maximum intensity at 26 East, where you see the most intense marine heat waves of the region really extend down to 250 meters. So we've looked at the events in the past. We've also looked at the seasonal forecast capabilities of these events. So at the top here on the left, we have the record for the surface conditions, and below it, we have the record for the subsurface conditions. And in this case, we quantified that with the upper 40 meters of the ocean. And what we find is that, first of all, in the Eastern Mediterranean anyway, the record of marine heat waves in the past few decades looks very different when you consider the subsurface. For example, 2003 was not present in the subsurface of the Eastern Mediterranean, whereas it caused great damage in the western side. And most encouragingly for us is that the correlation scores you see here in the yellow boxes, the skill scores are much higher for the subsurface forecasts. So again, we have potentially a more useful and potentially better predicted indicator. And that's a result we're very excited about in EuroSea. I think I'm coming up to the end now, so I will wrap up with a few key points. So ocean forecasting has historically trailed atmospheric forecasting, but I think EuroSea has accelerated that progress to seasonal forecasting with our global scale validation of the subsurface indicators. Overall, sustained observations lead to a consistent forecast quality, which we hope in EuroSea and beyond will lead to climate services for sustainable development. For example, tracking marine heat waves for aquaculture farms. And lastly, I would say that extreme events in the ocean are indeed 3D, and so the monitoring and forecasting needs to be, and it needs to be of a great variety, and it needs continuity. Thank you so much for listening. That's all from me.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Ronan. Good and clear. Well done. And almost exactly on time. So our next speaker is 𝗙𝗓𝗏. She's going to be our setting the scene speaker on EuroSea impacts. Dina is an expert in ocean science policy, stakeholder engagement, and ocean literacy. She's been leading the EuroSea work package on engagement, dissemination, exploitation, and legacy. And Dina has developed, together with colleagues in the EuroSea Steering Committee, the EuroSea Impact Monitoring Protocol to make sure that the impacts of the project are clearly tracked from its very start, heading us towards a clear and impactful legacy. So over to you, Dina.
Thank you very much, Steve. Good morning, everyone. You know, there are things in life you don't know you need until you don't have them. Most people won't wonder how climate change is being predicted, or how weather forecasts or ocean state forecasts are being generated, or how blue economy sectors are making sure there is food on our plate or parcels in our homes. There is one such thing that you will notice when it's not there, and you don't know you need it until you don't have it. It's the ocean observing system. There is no need to say that the ocean is very big and there is only one big ocean and we need to observe it and it is highly variable. We just need to say that ocean observing is a paramount necessity to be able to protect our ocean and to benefit from it. The global ocean is an interconnected system, and so is the ocean observing. Observations made for national funding for national needs and local necessities are of relevance in other countries or globally. And EuroSea is taking care that the European observations are integrated and are fit for the users, and that the global ocean observing system is stronger. 3 years ago, we set ourselves on an ambitious course to enhance the European ocean observing and forecasting system and to demonstrate how a stronger system like that can create blue economic opportunities, support authorities and businesses, provide safety to the population, protect assets and infrastructures, predict climate change, and generate the needed knowledge. In short, support sustainable development. Do you know how we thought we can do that? Well, we have a project with interconnected work packages, over 150 experts in all areas of marine science, and we have a dedicated impact monitoring protocol. Across a vast extent of EuroSea, from science to technology, to services, to governance, to legal issues, we have defined 8 impact areas. In each of these areas, we are achieving several impacts, which are specific and measurable. And we have been tracking these impacts from the early days of the project. This isn't an internal process. We are fully embracing open science and everything is being shared online. Here we are developing new pages that you will see soon on our website, and you have an example of one of the impact area here. Impact assessment for us is not performance evaluation. These 2 areas are related but are distinct. Performance relates to the efficient use of resources, while impact relates to a transformative effect on the users. Our anniversary webinars, like the one you're attending today, are helping us take stock of our impacts and discuss them with our partners and stakeholders. How can we create a broader market for ocean observing for the people who may not even know that they need it? How can we improve the sustainability of ocean observations? Our impact tracking helps us look for solutions and engage with partners and also with the European Commission. Ocean observing is multidisciplinary, multi-scale, multi-purpose, multinational, international, and global. Ocean is a system and it needs systematic observations, which reliably give us a variety of data and information. There is this famous phrase that if you like a good weather forecast, you can thank an oceanographer, but there are many things we can thank oceanographers for. Ocean observing has gone a long way from an activity mainly targeted at navigation or scientific research to now supporting a wide range of operational services for a very wide range of users. This evolution calls for a stronger recognition of the role and mandate of ocean observing as a societal service and not a merely sector-specific activity. A project has a beginning and an end, but we don't want EuroSea to end, not without an impact and legacy. We are giving you today a glimpse of the work we are doing across 3 areas in this webinar: coordination and governance, innovations, and global ocean observing system. Next year, we are launching a EuroSea Legacy Report, where we will showcase all our impacts and make sure that the knowledge we have acquired can be continued and improved. And this will continue in the UN Ocean Decade, in the framework for sustained European ocean observing system, in stronger partnerships in EuroGOOS or the global ocean observing system. But to make sure that happens, we are communicating like we are today, that for sustained provision of vital oceanographic services to the society, the ocean observing system too must be sustained. There are things in life you don't know you need until you don't have them. So let's hope we don't find out how it is without a well-doing ocean or a well-functioning ocean observing system. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks very much, and slightly ahead of time as well. So we're nicely on schedule. Thank you very much, Dina. So we're now on to our first panel. We've got a great bunch to start off the discussion with. So we've got, I'll just go through who the members are. We have Inga Lips. She's the Secretary General of the European Coastal Ocean Observing System, EuroGOOS, the European component of the IOC Global Ocean Observing System. And she's chair of the steering group for the European Ocean Observing System Framework, EUS. And together with 𝗪𝗪𝗘𝗔𝗡, who will be on one of our later panels, she's co-leading the EuroSea work package on governance and coordination of ocean observing and forecasting systems. The next panel member is Ian Shepherd. Ian works at the European Commission's Directorate General for Maritime Affairs and Fisheries on various topics. He's been around for a little while, so many of us know Ian well, related to the blue economy, including investment, marine data, and climate change. And then Erik van Doorn is the postdoctoral researcher at the GEOMAR Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research in Kiel, as well as a lecturer in international and European law at Kiel University, where he specializes in law of the sea and environmental law. For EuroSea, he's engaged with the governance and coordination of ocean observing and forecasting systems work package under the task of legal aspects of ocean governance and impact on the observing systems. So we're going to now move on to the introductory statements from each of the panels. So first one up is Inga.
Thank you very much. I'm just very briefly going to talk about the EUS and EUS new strategy, where we are heading to, but really in a very concise way. So first of all, the adequate ocean observations underpin Europe's ambition for sustainable development, protection of marine environment, and also preservations of resources and services. And the European Ocean Observing System, EUS, is, you can go to next slide, is the infrastructure, platforms, sensors, and people that gather this essential data and information about Europe's oceans, seas, and coastal waters. But to achieve a sustained EUS that is able to meet the user's needs, the EUS framework has been developed, and the framework offers a collaborative structure for key European actors in ocean observation to align and develop the components of a fully functioning and complete EUS and the resources needed to sustain it. Next, please. We are about to enter to the second strategy period of European Ocean Observing System, where we aim to advance the system to step closer to one which is sustained and meets the specific needs of the users. It is essential to unite the European Ocean Observing community to collaboratively design and work towards a sustained multi-platform, multi-network, and multi-thematic European Ocean Observing System. But the observing community shouldn't go alone in this path, but engage closely with European providers of services and products derived from ocean observations to really crystallize collaboration across the marine value chain and advise governance, funding, and policy making towards a sustainable European ocean observing system. And in order to fulfill these objectives, work during the next strategy period is divided into multiple activities. Some of these are listed here, and these activities include the co-design of the European Ocean Observing System with the stakeholders via mapping the users and stakeholder needs and priorities, but also improving the visibility of ocean observing activities, promoting best practices, fostering innovation in ocean observing in order to advance the transition to a well-connected and coordinated ocean observing system. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Inga, and well done. Sometimes people get very flustered when slides don't work, and you were calm and collected, so well done. Our next speaker is Ian Shepherd. So over to you, Ian.
First of all, thank you, Inga. You gave the needs very well. So now I'm just going to, I'm a bit apologetic because I can't say everything that I know because of this commission bureaucracy, but okay, I'll say what I can say. We did, during the public consultation we've done for ocean observation, we asked people, what are you observing and why are you observing? So in the first graph, you see what they're observing, and it's pretty well spread, and also among public, civil society, private bodies, public authorities and researchers. And why are you researching? And why are you observing? And most of it's for research, but also environment, fisheries impact, navigation, and other, which includes meteorology and other things. So the purpose, how much is being spent? And this is, you know, it's very difficult to get the numbers, but these are the sort of numbers that we get, that we come up with. For environmental monitoring, it's in the orders of 100 million, and up to research is about 1 billion a year, an annual. This is in the EU, by EU member states, public funding by the 27 member states of the EU. Now, the EU brings institutions together to deliver reliable access to data. Copernicus is a case in point. EMODnet also provides access to data from not only 27 member states, but also beyond, from neighboring countries, and also there's work with China and other countries. And the EU organizes satellite observation together. You know, they decide what satellites need to be launched, and they organize maintenance, operation of the satellites, and they organize access to the data from the satellites. But Inga knows this one very well because she provided it to us. But there's very divided responsibilities for in situ observations, also at an EU level, but also at a member state. I think I counted there's at least 5 ministries or departments that are responsible for observation in each country. And the problems: inefficient planning, opaque planning, insufficient sharing, insufficient innovation, unsustainable observation, inequitable sharing of effort, and lack of standards and best practice. So what we want is more transparency and collaboration at an EU level, but we can also include some non-EU countries. Progress towards a common EU approach for measuring once and using the data for many purposes. And propose joint planning of observation activities and a framework for collaboration on a national and EU scale. That's public information. when we asked people, what is the EU role in improving matters? Normally they say, bugger off, it's a national concern. But this time they all seem to agree that the EU does have a role. So we hope to unveil something next year. So that's it. Thank you.
So the third of our panelists will be Eric.
Thanks very much, Steve, and thanks very much for the organization for giving me the chance to get you at lightning speed through the international legal framework for ocean observing. I will try to touch upon some issues that might be helpful for you. The international law on most of the ocean observing that mainly you do is actually way too old. International law is generally old, but the international law of the sea is negotiated in the 70s and concluded exactly 40 years ago in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. And since this is already 4 decades old, it's mainly written in mind with research vessels in mind. So many of the ocean observing platforms that you now use, many of the instruments were not even in sight back at that time. However, these are mainly the rules that apply. So we need to fit many of the instruments that have been developed later under this system of rules. And I will just try to point out to you in the next 2 minutes where that works and where it doesn't. And the purpose for which these data are collected is actually key. So forget about the small print. This is just to show you that it depends a lot on where you take your ocean observations, right? So the closer you are to the coast in general, the more the coastal state actually has to say about if you are allowed to take these ocean observations or not. And it depends a lot on where it does take place. So within the territorial sea, up to 12 nautical miles from the coast, it's under the full sovereignty of the coastal state. Up to 200 nautical miles, if it has anything to do with resources, the coastal state can also limit your actions for ocean observing. Then again, there are many exceptions to these general rules. Hydrographic surveys, for example, are exempted in the Law of the Sea Convention from the general rules for marine scientific research, as it's called in the Law of the Sea Convention. And like that, this might be less relevant for the majority of the people listening in today. And second bullet point, resource-related research is also exempted from the general rules, meaning in this case that the coastal state can say, as soon as it relates to our resources, our resource exploitation, not just now, but also in the future, we should actually be able to limit it. Remote sensing, interestingly, if you go out from outer space or from the air, completely different system, and mainly much more a free-for-all, where coastal states cannot say anything about it. If we talk about operational oceanography, as the Americans dubbed it during the about 20 years ago, negotiating a new system for Argo flows, or sustained ocean observations, as we call it, different framework again. So we again have to look at something else. Marine meteorological and oceanographic measurements for example, the use of the WMO, the World Meteorological Organization, are exempted as well from these rules, because weather forecast was thought of to be so important in order to save human lives that this should not be able to be hampered or hindered by coastal states. I put a question mark behind animal-borne sensors, because how are we on Earth going to regulate this? We don't know where they're going, and these rules are generally also thought, since we don't know where they're going, and since these are animals, they also do not fall under the general rules applicable to marine scientific research. Quickly, normally you need coastal state consent, but if you negotiate bilateral or regional agreements, you might as well make this a lot easier instead of going for every single trip asking for consent. Normally, under the Law of the Sea Convention, you need agreement 6 months in advance if you do research in a certain coastal waters. This is, of course, way too much if you put Argo floats or gliders or anything else that goes with the currents. So we can actually harmonize this if we would think of a marine scientific research clearance office where we clear those things before we actually hit that 6 months boundary. Any inconsistencies between different coastal states could be easily resolved if we use a standardized form, such as the one that is drafted by the United Nations Division of Oceans Affairs and the Law of the Sea. And in order to get around what actually is covered by marine scientific research, we might also want to turn, and that is beyond the lifetime of EuroSea, the whole system upside down. Why not go for regulating every variable, no matter how it's taken? And this, for this, we could, for example, use the GOOS essential ocean variables as a option instead of Article 258, which more or less says any rules that we now have are also applicable to any new instruments, which is definitely not compatible with the practice of ocean science. Thanks very much.
Yeah, that was great. And as I'm working quite a lot in this area at the moment, and that's a really nice summary of the state of the art and how it's lagging behind the technology and our capabilities in some respects. So thanks very much. Right, panel, we've got a bunch of questions for you. We have some that were submitted in advance, and I'm sure there'll be some coming up on the chat from the audience as well. So I'm going to kick things off with some of the ones that we had pre-prepared. And the first question I'm going to ask, probably aimed at Inga, and it's, can you explain to our audience how the EuroSea project relates to the development of EUs?
Okay, thanks for the question. Maybe we should first start from the EU's project's vision, and we can see that EuroSea's project vision, sorry, I'm already messing up all the words today. I'm just have been traveling all morning. EuroSea's project vision is of truly international ocean observing system. And this is really well in line with the objectives of the EU's framework. And we really can say that EuroSea has contributed to the development of the European ocean observing system in its everywhere package, either improving the ocean observing coordination, system design, network integration, or innovation. So we all our community in the EuroSea have contributed to building and advancing the European ocean observing system. And as I'm co-leading with Emma Hassel of the Work Package 1, I might just pick up some examples from the Work Package 1. What we have done is that in Work Package 1, we have contributed to the development and implementation of EU's governance structure over the last few years. And with the support of the project, the Operations Committee was established already 2 years ago. And this is a very important committee, which is representing the ocean observing implementers at national, regional, and pan-European levels to really help with the long-term sustainability of the ocean observing efforts in Europe, but also to help to progress European ocean observing system progressively. We have also created connections with over 20 European countries via GOOS national focal points to improve the information exchange and facilitate the improvement of national ocean observing coordination, which was also brought out by Ian as one of the lack points. And the mapping of existing infrastructures and capabilities is in line with several tasks under the current EU's implementation plan. And in the EuroSea project, the mapping of European monitoring programs for biological observations was completed. And 2 networks were brought together to progress in biological community agreement across several key areas, such as data sharing and management, but also the development of best practices. And maybe last but not least, what to mention is that we not only need to collaborate in ocean observing coordination, but we also need to know what is working actually in the system. And we need to monitor the ocean observing system performance. And this has also been facilitated by the project in collaboration with Ocean Ops and European Ocean Observing System Operations Committee. So these are just few examples, but I think that the impact is very great and long-lasting.
Excellent, great, thanks, Inga. The next one I've got here is what do we need in terms of governance structures from an EU perspective to increase the effectiveness and efficiency of the ocean observing system in Europe, but also within its international context? And perhaps that's aimed at Ian and Toste.
You want to go first, Ian?
No, you go first.
Okay, you're passing the ball to me, and you know, governance structure is important to have for an ocean observing system. We're talking about the sustained ocean observing system that's going to have a long-term vision and needs a different governance than short-term research grant to do observations. So you can put a lot of attributes to a governance system, but I don't think we have any of those, you know, check the boxes here yet. And it's one ocean, so we need to make sure that whatever Europeans do are connected to what other people are doing, other parts of the world. And for that, we need a governance structure on a global scale. And Emma Heslop is here from the GOOS office, and she can speak to that. But the implementation of the observing system is happening in regions and nations. And if you go back to Europe, then, and as Ian was pointing out, there is a lack of coordination and joint planning and stuff like that. And bringing that back to what Inga was saying on EOS, that offers a possibility to do that joint planning and coordinate and you know, get synergy and use the resources in a more efficient way. But so far, the governance structure of this is pretty weak. So in this bottom-up, EOS is really a bottom-up initiative. So I think we are looking a little bit towards the European Commission and GEOMAR and DD Research to offer some legal framework for a governance system. They're going to make the observing system more efficient, and that has on to Ian to answer that. You know.
Yeah. Well, we've taken heed of all your the things in the consultation, and which you've all expressed very well, and we've looked at options, and now it's up to the President's Cabinet whether we go ahead or when we launch things. So that's all I can say at the moment. But I think all of you have been, the EuroSea's project has been very helpful. EuroGoose has been very helpful. All of you have been very helpful in getting the evidence base we needed to show that something needed to be done and that it was an important thing. Because one thing that's surprising to us, all of us, the need for ocean observation is obvious, but it's surprising how those not in the game don't realize this, you know, that, and you have to explain what ocean observation is. So that's and that's also what EuroSeas has helped to do. But okay, I can't say much more at the moment.
Excellent, thanks, Ian. Now, there's some quite closely related questions that have come up in the chat that I think work quite well for Eric. So, for example, from Nicholas Segerbath, we had, you know, what about the UNCLOS rules versus the EU internal market rules? You know, can ocean observing be considered as an economic activity subject to the internal market? But at the same time, Angel has asked, are the people involved in the UN, DOALOS, or others in charge of the regulations aware that some of these things don't work that well in practice? Is there a mood towards changing some of the processes to promote marine scientific research more broadly? And B. Burks, what is the role of the regional sea conventions to support the coordination of sustained observing? So perhaps, Eric, would you like to give a go at some of these? how do these EU level things fit into that broader international picture?
Yeah, thanks very much for those questions. I will try to keep it as short as possible, but Steve, please cut me off, because the only thing lawyers can do is talk. So you really need to cut me off.
Okay,
so
I was charged by the hour. Yeah.
Okay, I won't be. Don't worry. So the EU as such is actually also a party to the Law of the Sea Convention. So in that regard, the EU plus all its member states singly are actually bound by the Law of the Sea Convention rules. I think, Nicola, the point that you make is a very interesting one, because this also fits with what Ian said. Member states in the EU are normally very hesitant to give certain powers to Brussels, and it seems that that might be slowly changing when it's come to ocean observing. If you ask much older lawyers, they will say the EU has no competence on marine scientific research. End of story. And that luckily changes because ocean observing goes beyond marine scientific research. And I think, Nicola, that's exactly the point you're talking about. And as soon as it comes in the remit, if ocean observing comes into the remit of the internal market, the EU can take over completely from the member states, right? The question is then, do member states allow that to happen? But I think if that argument is to be made, I hadn't thought about that yet. That is a really interesting one, and it gives the EU competence to regulate ocean observing. And then indeed, the internal market rules would apply. That will be my short answer to that. And then Angel's question. So DOALOS, the Division of Ocean Affairs in the Law of the Sea, is a part of the United Nations Secretariat in New York. And they are aware of the fact that not everything works in part 13, which is titled Marine Scientific Research of the Law of the Sea Convention. However, they are, as being a secretariat and more a facilitator, very much dependent on what the member states, and in this case, the General Assembly of the United Nations, asks them to do. So if they don't, I get a feeling at least, but that's just my personal opinion, that if they don't get a clear mandate from the United Nations General Assembly, they would not necessarily be inclined to change things. However, we can push for those things, right? So we can push certain member states to ask certain things. So I think clarifying, for example, the interpretation of certain articles on marine scientific research in the convention is something that DOALOS can help us with very much. Then B's question about regional seas convention is a very interesting one. There is actually an article in the Law of the Sea Convention. If you want to write it down, it's article 123, paragraph C, which says states bordering an enclosed or semi-enclosed sea should cooperate, and then, among other things, to coordinate their scientific research policies and undertake, where appropriate, joint programs of scientific research. End of quote. This would encourage especially regional seas conventions, so the one for the Baltic, for the North Sea, for the Northeast Atlantic, but also for the Mediterranean, where we have these regional seas convention, HELCOM, Barcelona Convention, and OSPAR. If we are staying within the European theater, it depends on those conventions how they regulate it, but definitely from the international plane, there is an encouragement to increase cooperation when it comes to these kind of things. There's much more coming up, but Steve, should I leave it at this for now?
Yeah, leave it there for now, because I want to get just one more in before we go there very quickly, because I appreciate time is tight. Like quite a few people on this call, I was at COP27 last week and the week before, and one of the things that kept emerging was how many of the representatives of small islands and developing states and indigenous peoples expressed concern that they were often left out of the data collecting enterprise. Some instances were not even consulted about their needs, and that there is some specialist knowledge some of the coastal communities can provide. So are there ways where EuroSeas may help bridge that gap? So any of the panelists might want to try and answer that one.
I have one short comment which might be related, Steve. The thing is that now we have generally the WMO, so the World Meteorological Organization, is allowed to take observations anywhere, regardless, more or less, this is very much simplified, almost regardless of the rules of the Law of the Sea Convention. The main argument being back then, 40 years ago, we need weather forecasts in order to save lives. And I think, to be honest, we can expand that argument. We need climate data in order to save lives. And much of these climate data that are important for forecasting what's going to happen with the climate to live up to our Paris Agreement goals, for example, come from the ocean. So if we use the exact same argument, namely that these are going to save lives, then we would also have to have more lenient rules, more flexible rules, I think, for ocean observing. That's definitely not how the law is now, but that might be an argument that rings a bell with some states.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much. Sorry, we could spend a lot more time on this one. I can see lots more questions coming in, and there was certainly more on the sheet, particularly about the role of technology and such like, but maybe we'll be able to come back to some of them later. So we're now going to move on to our second panel. The theme here is leveraging our strengths, how innovations in European ocean observing and forecasting will benefit society. And the panel we have is 𝗪𝗪𝗘𝗔𝗡. He's a biological oceanographer specializing in the development, use, and application of numerical, hydrodynamic, and biochemical models, such as digital twins of the ocean, very topical at the moment. He works as a scientific officer at the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission, where his research supports and provides information for European policies, particularly the Common Fisheries Policy and the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. He's an expert in understanding and explaining the benefits of the Copernicus Marine Service for fisheries and society, which is why he's joining us today. The next panel member is 𝗪𝗪𝗘𝗔𝗡𝗖𝗪. He's a senior scientist with more than 25 years' experience as an ocean and atmospheric modeler. He holds a PhD in physics with a focus on climate science and serves as the technical director at 𝗓𝗏𝗏, sorry if I haven't pronounced that correctly, 𝗓𝗏𝗏 Ocean Weather Systems, or NOW. In the context of the Copernicus Marine Service, he's the leader of the 𝗬𝗓𝗏𝗏 Island Monitoring and Forecasting Centre, and in EuroSea, he's actively involved with the work package on coastal resilience and operational services demonstrations. And finally, Simona Messina. She's a physical oceanographer with more than 20 years of experience in ocean modelling and data assimilation, and is director of the Ocean Modelling and Data Assimilation Division at the Euro-Mediterranean Centre on Climate Change in Italy. She's contributed to the development of one of the global reanalysis systems provided by the Copernicus Marine Service, and is now currently supervising the team developing the global and Mediterranean ocean prediction systems. Within EuroSea, Simona is heavily active in work packages 4 and 7, focusing on data integration, assimilation and forecasting, as well as the Ocean Climate Indicators demonstrator. So, over to Diego, and 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm not sharing a presentation today because my message is quite simple one. I just wanted to mention that my involvement with EuroSea was in the context of an ocean health demonstrator in which we try to improve the predictability of a stock assessment model for a particular resource in northwestern Africa by linking the environmental information to these stock models. We were able to do that because of the existence of the wealth of information at the European level, which is freely accessible with this with a high quality observation and modeling observation and data. So I'm just here to speak about that we need to make sure that we have that we know that we have these resources online, that we have the Copernicus system that it was mentioned, also the EMONET as Ian was mentioning before, and all this wealth of information enables the interconnectivity of different tools or different approaches and different type of information, and promotes added value at European level of all these resources that are on our tips. Just to finish off mentioning that these are the building blocks of a very important initiative that you mentioned in the introduction, which is the digital twin of the ocean, which is this ambition of the European Commission to link different type of models, making use of the most accurate data that we have in order to build an information system that allows creating the generation of socially relevant scenarios, and to ask questions which can help not only policymakers but also other stakeholders in order to improve both our societal and the health and the status of our marine ecosystem at the European level. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Diego, and nice and short as well. So next up, we'll move on to, where is he? I'm just looking on my big screen at all of the all of the faces there. So it's let's have a look. So it should be Marcos now, please.
Okay. Yes. Well, thanks, Steve, for the introduction. Let me share. Well, my aim today is to show in this panel to give you some inputs on the operational service demonstrator that we are developing within EuroSea, and specifically I will focus on the demonstrator of the 𝗬𝗢𝗥 service. 𝗬𝗢𝗥 is an operational tool co-developed by 𝗬𝗪𝗘𝗔𝗡 and nologin. The name behind the acronym is quite self-explanatory. When we say 𝗬𝗢𝗥, we are talking about operational services for ports and cities. In a nutshell, in 3 minutes, the EuroSea 𝗬𝗢𝗥 tools, let's say, that aims providing a one-stop shop for services that integrates near real-time monitoring and short-term forecast. These tools support decision-making, improving environmental management and hazard warning, and in some way aims to drive forward the concept of smart maritime cities. Well, here we are not talking only about an application, or an IT application or a platform. We are talking that this needs a lot of work of all the partners that you see there to develop not only the required software, but install in situ observational devices and make some downscaling modeling in coastal areas for giving more inputs and data and contents to this platform. All these partners, we have worked together in the 𝗙𝗪𝗘𝗔𝗡 in developing and building the 3 pilot sites that you see below. 2 of them are in the Mediterranean, one is Barcelona, the other is Taranto, and we have a third one in Buenaventura, Colombia, in the Pacific coast. Let me tell you that we are ready for the launch in the Barcelona site. We have the full deployment already in place, and it's going to be an open public launchment in the following weeks. Indeed, we come with us with the support of the Barcelona Port Authority and the City Council, which they are the target end users, and they are already using 𝗬𝗢𝗥. They are indeed the admin users who will later grant it and manage the access to other end users. Well, my very last minute is just to give you a flavor on the user experience and basically how it looks like. You can see here in this plot how it looks like the access into the near real-time observations and the forecast. In a specific sites, of course, in the near real-time observation, you see here how you can see the information from a buoy, from a mooring buoy. Here you see the information from a meteorological station. Also, the forecasts are provided in different sites defined by the end users. This is operational points that the Port of Barcelona consider of importance for their operational operations, and also an example of the snapshot of the forecasting. I want to mention that the color code that you see in this synthetic way to show the forecasting and observation information using the traffic light, the classical traffic light color code is based on the use of different threshold values that are customized by the end users. The end user can define these levels when they have this color alert system being used. Also, the user can use different, based on this customized user-defined thresholds, they can setting up their own warning system, and the platform, the 𝗬𝗢𝗥 platform, will communicate customized alerts through emails or SMS or other pushing messages. Finally, mention here that this is not only a matter, or it's not only an application for seeing existing observations and modeling systems, but also there are opportunities to see in the 𝗬𝗢𝗥 and integrate other on-demand services. In this case, we have the example of the oil spill service in Barcelona site. And I think that that's all. This is the 𝗬𝗎𝗥 demonstrator in 3 minutes. Thank you very much for your attention.
Excellent. Thanks very much. And again, very much on time. So last of the panelists for panel 2 will now be Simona, please.
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me to this anniversary webinar and to this panel. I will try to add something if I can, because Ronan was very efficiently presenting most of the work that we have done together within EuroSea, but please go to the next slide. And yeah, I'm going to show again this value chain, because in synthesis, in this climate demonstrator, the real aim was to demonstrate the possibility to go through the whole value chain, starting from ocean observations that we use as initial condition for our seasonal forecast and for validation of the products, back to the end, to the societal applications, going through a predictive modeling approach. So here we're talking about seasonal forecasting, and I would like to mention again that predictions of anomalous seasonal condition provide industries and society the time to manage resources and the possibility to mitigate against ecological and economic damage. But as Ronan pointed out, seasonal forecast traditionally has been limited to land-based and atmospheric variables. The current seasonal forecast of ocean variables is completely not utilized and not exploited. Yet there is an increasing demand of information for planning marine-related activities that goes from marine transportation, fishery and aquaculture, and in general, national local resources management. So the aim of this demonstrator was to, first of all, to provide observable and user-relevant ocean climate indicators with reliable uncertainties, validated, and secondly, to start to build the connection with the stakeholders. Please, the next slide, if you can move. Yes, okay. So again, in the framework of the climate demonstrator, we come up with a set of indicators that have been defined, targeting different sectorial application, which might be relevant, you know, to society and some socioeconomic sectors. In particular, we focus on the marine heat waves. Why marine heat waves? Well, because they have really a potentially devastating impact on marine ecosystem and also translated to fishery and aquaculture industries. What we can get from the present Copernicus climate change service is something that you see, for example, here is just an example in the upper right panel. This is the, for example, SST anomalies coming from the multi-system seasonal forecasting systems, so collecting different forecasting systems all over Europe and not only Europe, of the temperature, sea surface temperature anomalies in a particular season, May, June, July of 2020. But we cannot state that the forecast systems as it's provided here is suitable for early detection, for example, of marine heat waves. What is requested is the availability and the provision to the real end user stakeholders of specific indices, such, for example, the number of the marine heat waves, in moderate marine heat waves, strong marine heat waves, and the amplitude of this anomalous condition. And this is what has been done as a case study by ECNWF, that is the other partner together with CMCC of this climate demonstrator. And this is just an example, you know, that you see in the bottom of this slide that show that the seasonal prediction of sea surface temperature as a skill in predicting marine heat waves. So next slide, please. The second activity, apart, in addition to the validation and the provision of these indicators, user-relevant indicators, was really to start, let's say, really to start the stakeholder engagement. So trying to understand their needs, their knowledge about the seasonal forecasting in general. And to begin tackling this issue, we decided to launch a survey that was sent to different sectorial applications, the marine protected areas and the aquaculture sector. This is just, the front page of this survey that has been launched and sent to, in general, to different associations and networks working in the aquaculture sector. And here I reported just, a selection of these first feedback that we got from the stakeholders and that they might affect the future development of seasonal forecast. A clear example is that they need not only surface products, but they are interested mainly in subsurface 5 to 15 meter temperature condition, more than temperature and biological condition. That's the depth at which most of the cages in the fish farms are located. So they are interested in the subsurface, and this is something that we learned. And we learned that they are aware of the changing condition, environmental condition, that they are already affecting their fish farms. So they are aware of increasing heat waves, and they are aware of the fact that some of the causes of these damage that they feel really are related to unusual seasons. So this is the first encouraging, feedback from this community, stakeholder community, that seasonal forecast might be relevant.
Thanks. We're going to need to, we'll have to wrap up this one soon, Simona, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'm done.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. Okay, right, let's move over to the panel questions. Again, we've got a few questions that have come in from our team. I suppose the first one is quite general for any of you. Is ocean forecasting now catching up or even surpassing atmospheric forecasting? Any views from any of the panelists there?
My feeling is that we are reaching the same level, and at least we are speaking the same language that the atmospheric forecasting now. I think that the development and the maturity of the operational oceanography is something that are disseminating information quite very quickly. All the observation satellites in situ, having all this ready for getting assimilated into model system and producing the analysis. I think that this is the basic thing to improve the skill of the forecasting. In that sense, Copernicus Marine, you mentioned before, is a milestone. Let's say we are reaching or not the level. I have a personal story. I started to do my first ocean modeling run 20 years ago, and when I came in from the weather forecasting and the atmospheric climate modeling, and when I asked him, after having my setup ready, I asked him to my colleagues, okay, give me the analysis. And they are looking at me like surprised and say, analysis, climatology. That was 20 years ago. Now we have really analysis. If I have a student or someone that is really new in the ocean modeling with me and asking me for this initialization or open model condition, I will say, okay, do you want a pre-analysis? Do you want to do a long period? Do you want the coverage? I can give you analysis of from the global system, or maybe something coastal, you can use the regional ones. So in that sense, my perspective is that we are really, really improving. But of course, we have the gap of the observation. This is classical thing, but also there are positive things that we are living in we have autonomous observation now. We are living in the Argo era, and this makes a difference also in that sense.
Excellent. Thanks, Marcos. I see Emma's got her hand up. Emma, would you like to ask the panel?
It was actually just a comment on the modelling. I'm not a modeler, so but I do see some of the things that are moving forward. So I agree with Marcos that the modelling capability for the ocean has improved dramatically. And you know, some of the challenges that EuroSea is working on, connecting modeling and observations so that we have a tighter coupling for systems. You also see this working in WMO in their coupled system and Earth system approach, in the work of Coast Predict, looking at downscaling and moving into the coast. These are kind of the next frontier of what we're doing, working observations and modeling really clearly together. And the other sort of area that I think still is an area that needs work, but goes hand in hand with increasing maturity, is developing the standards and the best practices for operational ocean forecasting. And this again is work that's happening within GEOMAR under the expert team on operational ocean forecasting, 𝗢𝗡𝗧, and also in the decade. So I'll just add those things in.
Okay, thanks, Emma. I had a couple of questions that come in on the theme of indicators and the value or otherwise of indicators. One of them being, do indicators actually, do they really help transfer scientific dynamic processes into information that's usable for the non-scientists? And a very closely related question, which was sharing the same understanding of indicators of marine events, such as heat waves, is key to enabling appropriate data and modeling techniques are used across the variety of users. Is it important that we understand which indicators are the most relevant for users, and how is EuroSea going to do this? So any of the panelists care to comment on that?
Yeah, maybe I can have a comment on this, because really that was one of the purposes of our work in the climate demonstrator, to show that indicators are essential really to transfer what is usually a knowledge based on a scientific approach that might be very easy for us researchers to understand, to something that is more synthetic, a synthetic view that can be used by the stakeholders, can be easier to be understood than the typical scientific approach based on statistical metrics. For example, in Ronan presentation, you show correlation, anomaly correlation, and something can be done even more, complicated at the level of metrics to show which is the skill of our forecasting system. But this is essential, that has to be simplified to reach, the last brick of this value chain, that is the exploitation of the results that we are doing by users and stakeholders. So presenting a forecast to a stakeholder means to convey information that are scientifically based on the forecast skill, on the way in which it is validated, but it has to be simplified, necessarily it has to be simplified. And one of the examples, the only example that I show about the predictive skills in terms of marine heat waves, I think is clear. What you can convey is not simply that one season will be anomalous in terms of, for example, temperature, but you can convey in an easy way how much it will be anomalous. It will be extremely cold, so it means it will follow in the lowest 10% of the ensemble distributions. It will be just cold, it will be warm or extremely warm. So each user making, by its own, a sort of cost-loss value analysis for its specific application can decide which threshold, which probability threshold will return a net benefit and take a decision. If we provide only correlation anomalies and very complex diagrams in terms of, validating metrics, that would not be possible. So I think indicators are essential.
That's great. Thanks, Simona. I've got another question that's come in. To what extent are the new technologies such as marine autonomous systems, surface and subsurface, improving our ability to gather these sustained ocean observations, these systems? any of the panelists?
I'm not an expert in ocean observation, but Joaquin was just mentioning in the chat that yeah, we are moving forward with ocean observation, particularly using these autonomous systems, and I believe that they are one of the key aspects for the future to build, to keep on building on our understanding and knowledge and all the data that is needed to feed into the models, both for initialization, as Marcos was saying, and also to calibrate, to validate the model forecast and scenarios. So obviously, this is it is the future and one of the building bricks of our next, let's say, phase of ocean observation and knowledge.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. And again, if any of the audience members want to ask questions in the meeting chat, you'll see there's quite a lot of questions and some answers being given in the side column as well. In case any of you are wondering what happened to Ronan, apparently there's been a fire alarm back at his institute. We were hoping to have him join this panel, but unfortunately he's not. Oh, actually, I see he's
back now.
So is there anything
in one piece
to add to this panel, Ronan, before we move on to the next one, which will be in just a couple of minutes?
I would copy what Simona said about indicators and add that perhaps it's a way of speaking the language of stakeholders, because we have to remember we speak different languages in the sense that we study the ocean in the same way in different ways. And with marine heat waves, it's something we've considered to be very important. And indeed, there's plenty of evidence that these extreme events are key for various stakeholders. I think a next key step is taking this work and actually sitting down with the stakeholders and not just defining a user relevant indicator, but co-designing. So making a user defined indicator. I think that's an important step for the future.
Excellent, thanks very much. Okay, well, I think as we've still got a fair bit to get through with the next panel, let's move on to panel 3. Which is on the theme of walking new paths, the community contributions to the UN Ocean Decade. And we have 2 excellent panelists for this one. And again, they're going to have plenty of opportunities for you to also ask some questions. We have Emma Heslop. Emma's a physical oceanographer with significant strategic and business development expertise. She's worked as a program specialist for the Global Ocean Observing System and the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO. And together with Inga Lips, she's co-leading the EuroSea work package on governance and coordination of ocean observing and forecasting systems. So that's Emma. And Joaquin Tintore, he's director of the Balearic Islands Coastal Observing and Forecasting System in Spain. And he's involved in several EuroSea activities and is a well-known individual in our community. So over to Emma first, please.
Good. Okay. So what I thought I just wanted to connect the work of EuroSea and the sort of the prime objectives of GEOMAR together, and then also move on and just see how that rolls into how we're working with the UN Ocean Decade. And how EuroSea is already contributing towards that to stimulate some conversation about where we perhaps go next as well. So what you see here on the screen is a visualization of what many people have mentioned, the need for us to connect our observations through to a variety of applications, through data management systems, analysis and models, and then through to the actual services and products that users need and use. And we've heard quite a lot of talk about that within the EuroSea presentations across the last hour and a half. And this value chain is really at the core of the Global Ocean Observing System 2030 strategy that was released in 2019. And it's really where we pin a lot of work today in making sure that these connections exist. And so EuroSea has been really important in looking at filling gaps in in many of these different parts of the value chain. So there is work being gone on in strengthening the observations in the work package 1 that I co-lead with Inga. We had the strengthening of the bioeco networks, for example. Inga mentioned that the tracking and reporting across the system through ocean ops. Within work package 3 around the ocean observing networks, there was many best practices and the raising of the TOR levels of various networks, which include, working on data. There has been the expansion of the biogeochemical Argo network and the defining of a marine debris EOV. So this is all work that is supporting, filling, I guess, gaps in parts of our observation and data flow systems. And then in the work packages 2 and work package 4, there's been work looking at how we use observing system design experiments, OSSEs, to define design for the observing system, work on assimilation of ocean data and downsizing of models for coastal applications, and a whole wealth of other work that you've seen happening in these areas. And it's really important within looking at this value chain to harness the research and innovation, but also make sure that these pieces are connected together to develop applications. And this is really where the work of the demonstrators that we've been talking about across these sessions is seen. The sea level products that aim to help areas deal with adaptation to sea level rise, the OSNAP things for the ports and the cities, the services there, the aquaculture and marine heat wave forecasting, and then making sure these are actually connected to new and novel observations. So there were new looking at bringing more carbon observations into the system in order to look at how we can improve that for climate indicators. So really connecting those. And the other connecting piece that EuroSea has been working on has obviously been EU's to take an overview and to connect these pieces together. So how does this link to the Global Ocean Observing System and the work in the Ocean Decade? So GEOMAR for the Ocean Decade set 3 major programs in motion, and these are really sort of connected around the theme of integration, but also around transforming GEOs in several areas where that's much needed. And so one of the key ones is ocean observing co-design. And this is all around how we co-design our observing system, how we make sure that the new and expanded observations really lead to an increase in the connectivity for service delivery, but also an improvement in those services that exist, say in the seasonal weather forecast, for example. Coast Predict is really looking at connecting the observations from the open ocean right into the coast and really improving our forecasting and service provision capability there. And Joaquin, who will speak next, is one of the co-leads of that program. And the third one is Observing Together, which is really looking at more community scale projects, but also really again looking at the value chain and how we really connect for communities to ensure that all observations count, but they also serve those communities. So one key area that the connection between EuroSea and the work, the leading edge work in EuroSea, I will say, and the decade is through the exemplar projects, and these are under Ocean Observing Co-Design. And you might see some familiar themes coming up here: carbon budgets, cyclone forecasting, the needs for marine life and coastal and regional communities, storm surge, marine heat waves, and boundary currents. These are the first exemplars that we will be working on. And so EuroSea, you've seen from some of these presentations already, a strength of development in marine heat waves. And this is now moving forward into the co-design exemplar. Again, work on carbon and carbon budgets, again, getting integrated into this co-design exemplar. There's a lot of work in the coast prediction area, and again, this is flowing into the work under Coast Predict. And I will also say that there was a workshop that helped cement many technical connections. The workshop was really to connect observers and modelers together. It was run by Ocean Predict, and their assimilation, 𝗬𝗎, so really doing some of the plumbing that needs to happen in order for a connected value chain to truly function. And finally, another sort of smaller example is really just showing the wealth of the work within EuroSea. It flows into things like finding the right connections to look at the aquaculture industry science connection for an OECD GEOMAR project around economic analysis. So I hope that gives you some ideas, and I really look forward to the discussion around how we further these developments.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Emma. A really good detailed introduction. So over to Joachim.
Thanks very much. Very useful. And I don't have slides, I just have hopefully one clear message to transfer and to share with you and to discuss all together. And I think the key message I want to convey today is really that EuroSea as an innovation action has allowed us to develop a number of products, processes, and tools that are now being used by stakeholders. And I think EuroSea, what is important to understand is that EuroSea has been doing this from the coast to the open ocean. We have many examples. We have seen some of them today for the coast and for the harbors in particular. And I think what to me is essential is that EuroSea and previous scientific and societal activities in Europe have allowed the initiatives such as Coast Predict. Coast Predict and EuroSea, somehow I like to say, will be providing solutions for enhanced coastal resilience in a changing climate. And if I can say, I think what is important in this EuroSea webinar is that EuroSea has somehow paved the way to Coast Predict. And I'll go to Coast Predict in a minute, but what I want to emphasize is without initiatives such as EuroSea and many others, but in particular EuroSea, we are in EuroSea webinar today celebrating. I think what is essential is that those elements have provided the capabilities today for everything we are planning for the future. So in particular, providing the science we need to developing the solutions that the stakeholders are really needing, are requesting. And an essential element in the last 5 or 10 years, if I can say, is that we scientists are now listening much more to what stakeholders and society needs. And this is evident on our presentations, and it's also evident in the future. And I think it's a great step forward. With all this, what I mean really is that now we are ready to propose big and challenging programs such as Coast Predict, which focuses on the coastal ocean, an extremely complex environment with extreme variability and many difficulties in terms of the observations, very high resolution needed. And that's where, as one of the questions before, autonomous systems can be really essential. A key element of Coast Predict then is really to provide solutions for enhanced coastal resilience in a changing climate. And Coast Predict, an essential element is that we focus on the many common worldwide features of the coastal ocean. I think this is an essential element of Coast Predict. A second key element is really the capabilities of integration of observations and modeling to respond to really the stakeholders' capabilities. We have 3 major high-level objectives: a predictive global coastal ocean, the upgrade to a fit-for-purpose oceanographic information system, and the co-design and implementation of integrated coastal observing and forecasting, adhering to best practices, etc. A key element of 𝗘𝗪𝗘𝗔𝗡 is really to devise solutions for worldwide coastal ocean. So we go from Europe to really the global ocean. And I didn't mention, but it's clear, and Emma made the point, 𝗘𝗪𝗘𝗔𝗡 is co-designed by with GEOMAR, and somehow to finish with these initial elements, the global coastal ocean concept has just started, I think. We will have a general assembly of 𝗘𝗪𝗘𝗔𝗡 in Bologna on early January 2023. We need to undertake of these developments by taking a holistic and convergent approach. And I'm inviting here everybody to get involved and contact us. 𝗘𝗪𝗘𝗔𝗡 will make, we hope, vital, real, and lasting change with the contributions of all of us. Thanks very much.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Joachim. Right, over to the questions. And we're also going to have Dina joining us in this panel as well to help with any answers. Now, in his last contribution there, Joachim mentioned the decade collaborative centres, and these are going to be an extremely important part of delivering the UN Ocean Decade. You know, we're having this network being established across the world, in different continents, and at least some of them are going to be located here in Europe. For example, the one on coastal resilience at the University of Bologna. So how do we see that EuroSea is going to be able to contribute to the work and the legacy of the Decade Collaborative Centres and the UN Decade as a whole? We've got the one on ocean prediction, for example, that's coming up. We've got the one on coastal waters, and further afield you have Indian Ocean ones, all kinds of centres coming up. So either of you or Dina, any thoughts or views on our role in the Ocean Decade there? Emma, do you want to go first? Or?
Yeah, sure. I think that, so the work of the EuroSea, I really think, as I kind of was trying to point out in with a short introduction, is really providing some of the building blocks for the GEO's Ocean Decade programs, despite not, the decade hadn't been launched, I think, when the proposal for EuroSea was being written. But the ideas behind EuroSea, the connection down the value chain, the connection to users in the demonstrators, are lying behind the, the GEO's strategy that flows into these decade programs. And so there is great alignment, and the pieces of parts of EuroSea are already, finding a home and a life in the within these programs. And I wanted to say that I don't think it's just EuroSea has done two things. It's worked not just on the sort of the headline results, right, the innovation, which it certainly has done, but it's carefully not neglected to work on some of the plumbing, some of the technical points, making sure that best practices are there, looking at the details of OSCEs and assimilation technology, because without some of this work on the plumbing, we won't have all the data and the information to make all the products and tools that we need. So I think, EuroSea has really done a balance between what needs to be done on that kind of plumbing sense, and also, how do we get to the more sparkly outputs. For the Decade Coordination Centres, there is going to be, hopefully, as we move through the decade, a kind of a group of three that maybe will echo some of that value chain sense. A Decade Coordination Office on ocean data, one on ocean observations, and one on ocean modelling. And a connection between these groups will be really important, because the decade, I mean, the constituent parts of the Ocean Decade go well beyond our traditional sort of ocean observing group. And so these decade offices look really at a broader constituency of users and really help us kind of, step beyond into what the ambition of the decade is.
Thanks, Emma. I see we have in our audience 𝗦𝗧𝗙𝗪𝗘𝗔𝗡, who's actually involved in the creation of the Decade Collaborative Center on Ocean Prediction. So would you care to make a comment?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Sorry for maybe you have a bad audio and a bad background. I am on the Mongoose General Assembly, and I escape a little bit to join you. So thank you for the opportunity to share this time with you. And I want to reinforce the messages that were sent both by Emma and Joaquin. The Decade Collaborative Center, it's a coordination structure, and we will work very closely with Coast Predict and with the other programs of the Decade to make this community fully transversal and fully integrating the different aspects from the users to the private sector. And in this framework, all the results from EuroSea are of paramount importance. And these ideas of integrating the application that has been developed in the different work package 5, 6, and so on of EuroSea into this new framework and into this new community that we will build together are really relevant. So my message is that yes, what you have achieved in EuroSea is very, very important, and we have to work through the different initiatives to try to extend these new developments to further application and to further users. So thank you.
Okay, thanks. Jochen, did you want to comment here?
Not really. I think it's clear. I think it's a matter of being sure that we have a strong coordination between the different elements. So I think it's very clear. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. And Dina?
Thanks, Steve. Yes, I would like to add, as I also stated in my remarks in the beginning, we are also working not only on science and technology and innovations, we're also working on visibility of ocean observations. We have just heard earlier from Ian of the European Commission that he still needs to explain something that is obvious to us all, that ocean observations are needed, but what is the deal with sustainability? Why are we not having enough? How are they done? What are ocean observations? These are all things that people funding them perhaps sometimes don't understand. So we are working on this translation of ocean observing science and necessity for it into policy language, into stakeholder language, into user language, and sometimes acquiring new users who even didn't know they needed ocean observations before. We have these examples on aquaculture, for example. So this is, of course, also a big contribution to Ocean Decade, because Ocean Decade is in itself a very big advertisement campaign for ocean science, for sustainability. That's my take on it.
Okay, thanks, Dina. Right, next question I've got come up is the UN Ocean Decade Challenge 7 is to expand the global ocean observing system and ensure a sustainable ocean observing system is available across all ocean basins that delivers accessible, timely, and actionable data and information to all users. So how does the work by EuroSea contribute to that Ocean Decade Challenge? Emma, do you want to...
Yeah, sure. So I want to pick up also a little bit on what Dina was saying. So I think that, somebody put a reference in the chat to the plumbing system and the sparkly fountain diagram, yes, which is essentially to say that if you want the if you want the sparkly fountain of things like the digital twins and to have, society able to ask many different sorts of questions and get answers, then we also need to work on the plumbing of the observations and the data flows and the best practices and making sure data is interoperable so that when it flows into these systems, people can ask questions that combine data and things like this. And so EuroSea has been working carefully on that, picking off, I guess, in a kind of a careful way, we're missing that bit there, this bit here, this bit in this network. So looking at supporting the overall flow not saying, well, we're just going to solve this thing. It's really helping ease blockages and stopping points in many areas. So I'm sorry to say, working on the plumbing. But on the exciting side, I want to pick up on what Dean has said around sustainability. It is important to sustainability that end users have access to the information that they expect from the investment that is made, and people know why they're making this investment in the observing system. And so within the co-design, which is around the co-design program, which is around revolutionizing the design of our observing system, one of the key things is to take these areas that of high societal need for innovation in observing, but also in modeling and delivery of the services, and really understand what the users need, and also do the value assessment so that countries can begin to have a view on what they anticipate to get for the investment in the observing, but also, you know, where we need where we need a new product, maybe a private sector actor to step in to develop that, but really to give more of a blueprint and leave the understanding of the value of these observations to support the sustainability and the uplift of the ocean observing system in these key areas.
Thanks, Emma. Jochen?
Yeah, thanks very much. I think to me, what EuroSea major contribution to what you indicated in terms of sustainability of the observing systems is really clearly related to one, the EuroSea very clear more listening capabilities. This is already in the DNA of EuroSea, and that was very important. And I think what is important is that this is being done. And we will reach the recognition that that Dina was saying in terms of the importance of ocean observation by the stakeholders. So it's not the scientists trying to convince the society of how important all this is. It's really when we will be requested by the stakeholders to have the ocean observations. And I think we're getting there. And I think EuroSea has made a major step forward on this. And as 𝗙𝗪𝗔𝗡 was saying in the chat, we have to try to talk more about the plumbing and less about the fountains. So I think it's thanks, 𝗙𝗪𝗔𝗡. And then the second, so first point is more listening. Then the second point is specific solutions and issues. And by this, I mean, I will just give a couple of examples. Best practices. EuroSea has been providing best practices and protocols that are essential for reaching a sustainable ocean observing system. Integration, ocean integration, an essential component. We are still working too much on silos, even though EuroSea is making great contributions as GEOs, etc. And all this has to contribute, I think, essentially to EOS. So I think I will leave it here right now. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks, Jochen. Let me thank all of the panelists who've given up their time today. It's been great. We've learned a lot, and you'll have seen that there's a great deal of chat that's gone on the side as well. And Nicole will be sharing some of the key messages later on. So, and she'll get back to you with that. So I'm going to pass on now to Toste to give the last couple of slides, and then on to the final session. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Steve, for excellent moderation, and thanks for all the panelists and the questions. It's been really, really good. I took this picture from Ronan's presentation, and I think it really symbolizes a little bit of what we have had a discussion on in the chat the last 10 minutes here about the plumbing and the fountains. So EuroSea is an innovation action, and we are trying to use about half of our resources towards that plumbing, the design and the coordination, and so on and so on. And another half of the resources towards some fountains, some things. And this particular funding here, or picture, shows that flow, the mooring in front of the aquaculture center. So we have a private company providing, technology. We have private companies working on aquaculture, and we're providing a service to that aquaculture. But nothing of that would work with only that mooring if you don't have the plumbing, the observing system and data streams and big scale modeling, be able to provide that. So we're trying to find that right balance, or we're trying to find a balance on that. And this is what I think EuroSea is doing. And just to sum up a couple of slides here and key messages that I found through this session here. And again, from Ronan, don't forget the ocean is in 3 dimensions, right? And we need 3-dimensional sustained observations for reliable forecast and seasonal forecast. And Ronan demonstrated that very clearly, and we heard that from others as well. And another key message I heard was on the EOS framework. And EuroSea has been working very hard towards that framework to offer a collaborative structure for key European actors in ocean observation, but also as a conduit to be, deliver data that can then be made into services and products for stakeholders. We heard from Eric about the United Nations Convention on Law of the Seas and the somewhat outdated law of the sea when it comes to ocean observations, and how we maybe can make practices of that law a bit more applicable for modern technology and requirements. And I think what we've seen here, some products and services for stakeholders, and that's really important. We would like to show, we have to show that ocean observations really bring something for stakeholders, and I think we showed a few of those. And my last point here is that the UN Ocean Decade will advance ocean observing and forecasting, and EuroSea's activities are contributing to this. But EuroSea activities is also contributing to the plumbing, if you like, the program, the permanent programs and so on that is providing that plumbing, right? So that's some key message I got from the last panel here. And I would like to thank you all for joining. And I hope to see you next year. We won't have an anniversary webinar. We will actually meet in person at the IOC headquarters at UNESCO in Paris on 21st of September. Easy to remember, as that is the fall equinox. We're going to be internal meetings on the 2 days before, but this is an open meeting and a high-level meeting. And by that, I will say goodbye and thank you very much. And if you check the chat, I think Nicole has put in some of these links to our website, YouTube, and Twitter accounts on the chat. I learned a lot. I think that was a great conversation today, and I thank you very much for joining. Stay tuned. Take care and bye.